Good evening with the news at 10 p.m. My name is Michelle Malunga. The headlines: a female Zanaco employee has stolen 59,000 kwacha from a client using a cloned ATM card and attempted to set the Zanaco Monze branch on fire to cover up the haste. The Food Reserve Agency FRA has entered the market and has set 110 kwacha as the price at which it will buy a 50 kg bag of maize. Vice President Inongewina says a lifestyle audit of ministers is only feasible if all members of parliament agree to be audited. The news in detail. Police in Monze have launched a manhunt for a female Zanaco employee in connection with arson and the theft of 59,000 kwacha from a client using a cloned ATM card. This comes barely weeks after a Barclays Bank Zambia employee, Pamela Gondwe, robbed the bank of about $400,000. Police spokesperson Esther Katongo has identified the Zanaco employee as Iminda Musialika, who works at Zanaco Monze branch. Mrs. Katongo says the incident is reported to have occurred on 3rd July 2019 at Zanaco Monze branch. She says the suspected is alleged to have stolen the money from a client and that at the time officials from the bank were viewing CCTV footage to establish who could have withdrawn the money using a cloned ATM card. She allegedly set the registry room located next to the information room on fire in a bid to destroy the evidence, but the fire was quickly quenched by other bank officials. Mrs. Katongo says Musialike is currently on the run and investigations have since been launched. Meanwhile, 3 people have died in a road traffic accident when a truck they were traveling in overturned at Musonda Falls Hills along the Mansamwense Road. Mrs. Katongo says involved was a Forden truck and trailer registration number ASB 1327 and ASB 1717ZM, property of Jimbara Milling Company. She says the truck was being driven by Andrew Mulenga, heading in the northern direction.
The suspect is alleged to have set the registry room on fire and some properties got burnt. She is alleged to have stolen 59,000 kwacha from a client and that at the time officials from the bank were viewing CCTV footage from the information technology room to establish who could have withdrawn the money using the cloned ATM. The suspect is alleged to have set the registry room, which is located next to the information room, on fire in a bid to destroy evidence. But the fire was quickly quenched by other bank officials. She's currently on the run and investigations have been launched. 3 people have died in a road traffic accident which occurred today at about 7 hours at Musonda Falls Hills on Imansa Mwense Road. Involved was a truck and trailer, property of Jimbara Milling Company, which was being driven by Andrew Mlenga, heading in the northern direction. The accident happened when the truck was ascending Musonda Hills and in the process overturned, killing 3 people who were on board.
The Food Reserve Agency FRA has announced that it will buy a 50 kg bag of maize at 110 kwacha in the 2019 marketing season, an increase of 40 kwacha on last year's price. The agency will, with immediate effect, enter the maize market and is expected to stop buying maize on 31st October 2019. FRA Board Chairman Joe Simachela has told a media briefing that the 110 kwacha price was arrived at in view of the climate change that characterized the 2018 to 2019 farming season. Mr. Simachela says the FRA needs about 675,000 million to buy 300,000 metric tons of maize, 4,000 metric tons of soybeans, and 1,000 metric tons of paddy rice. He says government has released an initial amount of 74.1 million kwacha for payment of farmers on the first-come, first-serve basis. Mr. Simachela says the funds have since been dispersed to financial institutions in the various districts for the payment of farmers who deliver the crop to the depot upon meeting the necessary documentation and scrutiny. The FRA board chairman says the agency will operate 600 satellite depots in 105 districts.
White maize, 110 kwacha for a 50 kg bag. Soya beans, 150 kwacha for a 50 kg bag. Paddy rice, 70 kwacha for a 40 kg bag. Please note, and I repeat, that these are not floor prices, but rather FRA prices under the principle of willing seller and willing buyer. I wish to state that in arriving at determined prices for 2019, FRA acknowledged that this year is a unique year, and I think we all know that, and that there's urgent need for FRA to replenish the strategic grain reserves from a volatile grain market obtaining locally and in the region. I'm sure we all heard about the issues happening in Mozambique and Zimbabwe. So we really need to replenish our strategic reserves, and that is the reason why I'm sure you've seen a good shift in terms of the price. It's anticipated that FRA prices shall not disadvantage the private sector, who are expected to purchase the larger share of the 2 million metric tons produced in the case of maize. So we expect a lot of private participation during this season. In terms of the 74 million, this is the amount of money which has been released by government for immediate purchase of the crop for this season. So this money, once farmers deliver their crop to our depots, and once scrutiny is done on the documents which they have presented, they'll be being paid cash. This is unique actually for FRA. I think most of you have been hearing issues of late payments, but I think this is something we've tried to address in this marketing season. So the 74 million is a payment which has been secured for immediate purchase. And as I mentioned, periodically government will now be releasing funds for purchases of all crop which is coming through, even after the 74 million is exhausted. White maize, 110 kwacha.
Speaking at the same briefing, FRA Chief Executive Officer Chola Kafwabulula has appealed to the public not to panic as Zambia has enough maize in the reserves.
First and foremost, yes, we are going to operate 600 satellite depots in 105 districts. But if you look at the statistics that we have from the production, most of the maize is in the northern part of the country. So from the satellite depots in the 600, most of them are concentrated up north where the maize is. Of course, in the drought-prone areas, most of the areas actually, there's no maize because there's drought anyway. So in those regions, we have very, very few satellite depots. But also, it does not make any economic sense to put up a satellite depot where you know that there's no maize. We need to appreciate also that these satellite depots actually cost money. We pay quite a lot of money to set up a satellite depot per month. So there's no economic sense in setting up a lot of satellite depots in those areas. But we have put up a few because although there's a drought, some of the districts still have a bit of maize. But the concentration of these depots is up north because that way it makes business sense.
The Zambia National Farmers Union, ZNFU, says the announced maize price of 110 kwacha per 50 kg bag of the Food Reserve Agency FRA is far below the current maize prices being offered in the main producing areas such as central and eastern provinces. The Food Reserve Agency FRA has announced the price of 110 kwacha per 50 kg for white maize, 140 kwacha per 50 kg bag for soya beans, and 70 kwacha per 40 kg bag for paddy rice. ZNFU Media and Public Relations Manager Calvin Kalei says the announced price is nowhere near the range recommended by the stakeholders during the consultative meeting with the Ministry of Agriculture of 130 kwacha to 140 kwacha per 50 kg bag of white maize based on prevailing market price indications. Mr. Kalei has noted that there are different producer prices prevailing in different parts of the country being offered by private buyers who are paying spot cash, and the fact that the maize production forecast declined. Farmers should search to obtain the best price possible prevailing in the area. He says the union recognizes that the cost of production has increased and continues to escalate, while the asset base of the farmers has been wiped out by the adverse weather pattern, which has been prevailing season after season since 2015, and the hostile macroeconomic environment. Mr. Kalei has further expressed concern that farming profitably has remained unattainable by many farmers.
So to us, the price that we're going to be comfortable with was at least between 130 and 140. In Eastern Province, for your own information, 150 is what is prevailing. You know, farmers are selling at 150, pay 50 kg bag. You know, and selling and offering farmers 110 really is very, very, very unfair, to say the least. It's very, very unfair. And we say the Food Reserve Agency should have been a little bit more considerate. That, you know, there are a lot of factors that went into producing this current maize. We are talking about a season where the southern half of the country was affected by drought, and even the figures themselves can speak. You know, you're talking about a decline in projection to about 2 million metric tons. Whether that is correct, that's a question for another day. But a decline is there in white maize production, and that should have been taken into consideration. How much did farmers put in to produce that? So the price is not motivating farmers. It's a dampener to farmers, and we are feeling that this is going to cause farmers to think other directions during the coming season.
Vice President Inonge Wina says a lifestyle audit of the ministers is only feasible if all members of parliament agree to be audited. Mrs. Wina has argued that the fact that all members of parliament are required to declare their wealth prior to being sworn in, lifestyle audits cannot be confined to ministers alone. Speaking during the Vice President's question time, Mrs. Wina said this being the case, application of the provision of the Anti-Corruption Act on lifestyle audits should not be discriminatory. Mrs. Wina is of the view that this law should be applicable to all members of the Zambian society. She has, however, cautioned that application of the law that allows the ACC to conduct lifestyle audits would be a mammoth task, and that no budgetary allocation has been made for such an exercise. The Vice President was responding to a question by Leader of the Opposition, Jack Mwimbu, who wanted to know why the ACC is not being encouraged to conduct lifestyle audits on those accused of corruption.
Why are you not adhering and encouraging the Anti-Corruption Commission to do a lifestyle audit on those who have been accused of being corrupt?
Even the chief report does not only confine itself to ministers. It mentions a lot of other players, including private sector members. So the lifestyle audit for ministers only not be of order. So unless perhaps we all agree that every member of parliament should be audited. Perhaps this may be viable, but for now, I don't think this law should be discriminatory and be applicable to a sector of our society and not everybody else. And it would be a mammoth task to undertake such a lifestyle audit for everyone, including those in business, as to where they get the money from. And there is no budget for this exercise.
President Edgar Lungu has delegated Minister of Foreign Affairs Joseph Malangi to represent the country at the 12th Extraordinary Summit of the Assembly of the African Union Heads of States and Governments in Niger. Speaking on the sidelines of the Executive Council in Niger, Mr. Malangi says Zambia stands to benefit from some AU flagship programs such as the Africa High-Speed Train Project, which will see Zambia being a manufacturer of one of the key components of the train that is expected to run from Cape to Cairo. He says Zambia supports the African Union Commission budget for 2020 as the country subscribes to the principle that Africa should fund its own programs. Mr. Malunga, however, urged the AU Commission to ensure that there was diligence in the use of resources availed to the African Union in line with the aspirations spelled out in Agenda 2063. On the African Continental Free Trade Area that will become operational during the summit, the minister said President Lungu's signing of the CFTA protocol is testimony that Zambia is committed to being part of the envisaged big market. He said the only process that remains was the ratification of the AfCFTA agreement by Parliament that is expected to be done after stakeholder consultations are concluded. And the minister urged the African Union to avail emoluments for the staff that has been employed by ECOSOC in order to fully operationalize the interim secretariat based in Lusaka. And ECOSOC President Aboza Eligai commended the Zambian government for the commitment in the relocation of ECOSOC. He says the decision by Zambia to avail interim offices for the Secretariat is testimony of the country's commitment to ensuring that the relocation was a success. This is contained in a statement issued to QTV News by First Secretary for Press and Tourism at the Zambian Embassy in Ethiopia, Ingutu Mwanza. Energy Minister Matthew Nkua has disclosed that preliminary investigations into the contamination of petrol sold at some filling stations in Southern Province have revealed that the fuel was mixed with diesel. Ms. Nkua says the fuel could have either been smuggled or transported in tankers that were not properly cleaned. In an interview with QTV News, Mr. Nkua says it has also established that the contaminated fuel was not from the Lusaka fuel depot, which supplies Southern Province. He says had this been the case, all filling stations in Lusaka and others that draw fuel from the depot would have had contaminated fuel. The Energy Minister says the team of experts that was constituted to collect samples at affected filling stations in Southern Province is now at Indeni Oil Refinery to test the contaminated fuel.
It's only at Indora Indeni Oil Refinery that we have a lab that can test the contamination of the fuel, and that is being done right now. And upon the results that are going to come out, we'll be able to know where exactly the problem is. But from top of my head, I tend to think that it's not from the tanks, because if it's from the tanks, all the other filling stations in Lusaka and so on, which draw fuel from the depots in Lusaka, would have had contaminated fuel. But I tend to think that this fuel is maybe coming from the people that are delivering the fuel. You asked me earlier on, it could be true that it could be a mixture of fuel which could have been smuggled, and the indications so far on the first test indicate that the petrol was sort of contaminated with some diesel in it. So maybe they didn't clean up the tank as well or something, but we'll be able to get to the point. But one thing for sure that I can say is that it is not from our depots, because if it was our depots, definitely everybody would have been affected. But it's maybe a few transporters that transported that fuel that causes problem.
The Disaster Management and Mitigation Unit, DMMU, will send an additional 1,500 metric tons of relief food to hunger-stricken areas in southern and western provinces. The minister in the office of the Vice President, Sylvia Chalikosa, says this is notwithstanding the fact that these are not the only affected provinces in the country. Ms. Chalikosa says government is mindful that the hunger situation is more severe in some parts of the country compared to others. She has told QTV News that the DMMU is therefore making distributions based on the schedule that was drawn up for a period of 8 months starting from 1st March 2019. Ms. Chalikosa says details of how the distribution will continuously be done will be released after her office receives an in-depth vulnerability and needs assessment report on the hunger situation. She says a compilation of the report has since been completed by the DMMU but is yet to be presented to Cabinet.
So the hunger situation is in different parts of the country, some more severe than others. But we're working on a distribution based on a schedule from March over the period of next 8 months. And the details of how we are going to do the distribution continuously will come out after we receive the in-depth vulnerability and needs assessment report, which has now been completed and will be shared and brought to Cabinet sometime next week, after which we shall make the report available to the public so that they know where the government will be responding to the emergency of hunger within the country. So,
the Foundation for Democratic Process FODEP Executive Director Mwenge Chimfwembe has welcomed the decision by the Electoral Commission of Zambia to embark on the delimitation of constituencies, wards and polling districts in the country. Mr. Chimfwembe has since appealed to all stakeholders in the electoral process not to politicize the delimitation process. He notes that some politicians might try to take advantage and frustrate the efforts of the Electoral Commission of Zambia to undertake this process. He has noted that the exercise will increase representation of voters in the country. Mr. Chimfwembe has told QTV News that FODEP will continue to support developmental programs that bring positive change to the Zambian people.
Well, first of all, we want to appreciate the initiative. I think it has come at the right time. There's been population increase, and also there's been a number of features that have changed the electoral landscape. So I think it is pertinent that this exercise is carried out. We also feel that it's important going forward that much as the Commission is going about this exercise to ensure that the process remains non-political, remains fair, and at the same time that predictable, because there is a temptation basically by some stakeholders, political parties in particular, who may want to take advantage of this process. But all that we are saying is that the process must be able to actually satisfy all the stakeholders. I think that is what is expected of this process. Well, first of all,
and Forum for Democracy and Development, FDD, says the decision taken by the Electoral Commission of Zambia to undertake the delimitation exercise in readiness for the 2021 general elections is overdue. FDD Acting Chairperson for Information and Publicity, Yotam Mtayachalo, notes that it has been a very long time since the country undertook the delimitation exercise, despite a rapid increase in the population over the years. Farmers in the country have been advised to take advantage of this year's crop marketing season to maximize profits from the sale of their produce. Chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture, Maxis Ngonga, notes that in a year like this one, where there's a shortfall of the grain, it is an opportunity for farmers to get the best price for their produce. Mr. Ngonga has told QTV News that as chairperson of the Parliamentary Committee on Agriculture, he cannot advise farmers to wait until they sell their produce to government in the name of patriotism.
It's not necessarily patriotism that would encourage them to sell to the government just because the government wants to put this food into our reserve for feeding the country. The farmers must realize the best price out of the commodity that they are selling, and therefore we are encouraging FRA to move into the market very quickly before farmers are able to sell this crop to other buyers. The advantage FRA has is that it's a assured market. They do not defraud or take advantage of the farmers. but they must be able to plan and get into the market as quickly as possible.
Tobacco Free Association of Zambia Executive Director Brenda Chitindi has expressed that health officials are ignoring the dangers of shisha to health, a situation she has described as worrisome. Mrs. Chitindi says there are enough global evidence and warnings over the risks of shisha smoking. She says it is very clear that shisha products are being pushed very hard to children, youths and adolescents. Mrs. Chitindi says that this creates an entirely avoidable risk of a new generation that will be addicted to nicotine. She states that shisha smokers face the risk of the same kind of diseases as cigarette smokers, such as heart disease, cancer, respiratory disease, and problems during pregnancy. Mrs. Chitindi has urged the Ministry of Health to pull up its socks and increase health promotions and awareness programs in communities and earnestly speed up the Tobacco and Nicotine Products Control Bill process, which has been dormant for almost 10 years. She has told Q News that once this bill is passed into law, it will serve the population and especially the young generation who are a target of the tobacco industry as their future customers. Only 20 milling plants are remaining to be installed to complete the first phase of the Presidential Solar Milling Plants Initiative project. Zambia Cooperative Federation ZCF Director for Projects and Operations, Derek Sokoni, is optimistic that the first phase of the project, which involves the installation of 1,552 solar milling plants, will be completed before the end of this year. Mr. Sokoni says the installation project is in its last stage, with the remaining 20 solar milling plants to be installed in Western Province. He explains that the number of milling plants for the project has reduced from 2,000 to 1,552 due to various reasons, which the cooperative will share in a comprehensive statement after the completion of the project.
So far, we are in the last stage of our project, meaning we are winding up. We are now working on Western Province, where we are trying to put up the remaining mills that are meant for that province. Since they were allocated 62 mills, we have done so far 20, which have been successfully completed, and they are yet to be commissioned and handed over. As soon as the work is completed, we will be doing all the reconciliations of our figures to see where we are, what is left out, and whatever challenges that we faced to do the entire project so far. The figures as we stand now, we are at handed over, we are at 1,449 hands over, and we are about 101 which have not yet been commissioned. The target is almost there because we are about 1,548, that's where we are. So we are supposed to get about 1,553 to wind up. And then that's the time when we will be saying, okay, what is it that is still not done and why has it not been done, so that we can consider it maybe in the second phase. So we still have an open door to reconsider what was not concluded, because we still have leftovers in all the provinces, not in every province that we satisfied what they needed according to the allocations.
The Lusaka City Council LCC has directed bar, nightclub and restaurant operators to designate smoking and no smoking zones in their premises or risk being penalized or closed down. Council Public Relations Officer Lisa Ngoma says the council has observed that many alcohol drinking places and restaurants no longer display smoking and no smoking signs to guide smokers and non-smokers where to go, a situation which is affecting non-smokers through involuntary passive smoking. Ms. Ngoma states that the local authority will therefore move in to take necessary action against those found wanting. She has since called on members of the public to help the council address this issue by alerting the local authorities on bars or nightclubs without designated smoking zones. The Young Women in Action YWA says there is need for people to stop paying a blind eye to violations of children in their communities. YWA National Coordinator Harriet Chibuta says it is everyone's responsibility to ensure that children are protected from any form of violations in the communities. She says people should not be hesitant to report any form of violence inflicted on children, even if the perpetrators are their own relatives or guardians. Ms. Chibuta has stressed that ending any form of violation in the country requires concerted efforts from various stakeholders and, most importantly, the community, because this is where such cases start from.
Children are supposed to be protected. Those are our future leaders. Communities, people in communities, we strongly urge you to ensure that children are protected. You see a child being violated, being beaten, whether it's physically or a child being tormented, you speak against it. It's high time we spoke against violations of children. You know, these are our future presidents. How do you have a president who's broken? How is he going to lead? How is he or she going to lead the nation? How do you have a father or a mother who is psychologically distorted? There's no way we're going to move forward if children are violated now. Please, we call upon all stakeholders. The children are our future. Protect them. Ensure that they're in environments that are safe. Be it in school, at home. We really urge everybody to just ensure that children are protected.
A recap of the stories making headlines. A female Zanaco employee has stolen 59,000 kwacha from a client using a cloned ATM card and attempted to set the Zanaco Monze branch on fire to cover up the haste. The Food Reserve Agency FRA has entered the market and set 110 kwacha as the price at which it will buy a 50 kg bag of maize. Vice President Inonge Wina says a lifestyle audit of ministers is only feasible if all members of parliament agree to be audited. Ends the news. Pleasant viewing.